Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of a written record that we have.
A clay tablet over 4,000 years old, catalogued as K.3657, sits inside the British Museum, nearly identical to others found in Istanbul Archaeological Museums. For decades, scholars treated it as myth until the translation revealed something unexpected.
They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
This tablet doesn't just describe an underground world. It reads like a record of a real place, tied to regions beyond Mesopotamia that align with ancient migration and trade routes stretching into Central Asia. Today, we're going to break down what it actually says and why it suggests this wasn't imagination. It was experience. The tablet that reads like a map, not a myth. The object at the center of this mystery is not some vague legend passed down through generations. It is a physical artifact, catalogued as K.3657, preserved inside the British Museum, with a near-identical textual tradition linked to tablets held in the Istanbul Archaeological Museums. It was recovered from the ruins of Nippur, one of the most sacred cities in ancient Mesopotamia, dated to roughly 2400 BCE. That alone already matters, because Nippur was not just any city. It was a religious and administrative center where records were expected to be precise, structured, and intentional. And that is where things begin to shift. The text does not read like mythology in the way most people expect. There are no dramatic divine battles, no symbolic metaphors stretched across poetic lines. Instead, what appears in translation is something far more controlled. Directions, descriptions, environmental observations. The kind of language Sumerians used when documenting trade routes, resource locations, or expedition records. Scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer spent decades studying these patterns, and one thing became clear. When Sumerians wanted to tell a story, they sounded very different from when they wanted to record a place. This tablet sounds like a place. It describes Kurr, a term long translated as underworld, but the original meaning is far less settled. In early Sumerian usage, Kurr could mean mountain, foreign land, or a region beneath the Earth's surface. Not a spiritual afterlife, but a physical domain that exists beyond normal reach. And the details it gives are strangely grounded. A region of darkness, yes, but broken by light that does not come from the sun. Waters that do not behave the way surface rivers do. And most striking of all, a ceiling that curves downward, as if the sky itself has been inverted. Here is where a small but critical linguistic shift changes everything. For years, one key phrase was translated as, "the place where the sun is swallowed." It sounded symbolic, like a poetic way of describing sunset. But later analysis showed that the word used could also mean enters, or passes into. Not the sun disappearing, the sun physically entering something. Now the image is completely different. A location where sunlight penetrates into an opening deep enough to carry it inside the earth. That is not mythology, that is geometry. And the deeper you look into the tablet, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Because it does not just describe the place, it hints at preparation, at danger, at the idea that not everyone could go there. Some interpretations suggest references to purification before entry, which many assumed was ritual. But modern researchers have pointed out something far more practical. Deep cave environments can alter breathing conditions, oxygen levels, even the body's ability to function. Without adaptation, entering such a place could be deadly. So what you are left with is something unsettling. A 4,000-year-old record, written not like a myth, but like a warning. A location beneath the earth, described with environmental accuracy. And just enough detail to suggest that whoever wrote it had already been there. The detail most people miss, a sky within the earth. There is one line in the tablet that scholars often gloss over because it sounds too poetic to analyze seriously. It describes Kurr as a place where the heavens curve downward. For centuries, translators treated that phrase as symbolic language for death or spiritual descent. But when you strip away modern assumptions and look at it through geological reality, the wording becomes startlingly literal. In massive subterranean chambers, the kind that stretch hundreds of meters across. The ceiling does not look like a flat roof. It curves. Light, even the smallest flicker, reflects unevenly across mineral deposits embedded in the stone. In certain cave systems, especially those rich in calcite, selenite, or fluorite, natural crystalline formations scatter and amplify faint illumination. To ancient observers carrying oil lamps or torches, those mineral flecks would shimmer against the dark stone like distant stars. Imagine standing inside a cavern so large that your torch cannot reach the walls. The ceiling arches over you in a dome. The darkness above is textured with points of reflected light. The air is still. Sound travels differently, echoing with a hollow delay. To someone from the flat river plains of Mesopotamia, where the sky was a vast open dome above, the sight of that same dome appearing underground would not feel metaphorical. It would feel like the sky had been flipped. Modern speleologists have documented this exact sensory effect in enormous cave chambers. In places like Son Doong in Vietnam and the Miao Room in China, explorers describe disorientation so strong that even trained scientists report a temporary loss of spatial awareness. The ceiling feels infinite. The ground feels curved. Without external reference points, the mind struggles to process scale. Now consider that the Sumerians had no framework for geological megastructures, no concept of plate tectonics, no language for karst formation or subterranean erosion patterns. What they had was cosmology. So when they encountered an underground dome that mirrored the heavens, the only vocabulary available to them was divine. And here is the part that makes it even more compelling. The tablet does not describe fear of this inverted sky. It describes familiarity. It reads as though the observer had time to notice details, to record them, to treat the place not as a nightmare, but as a destination. That subtle shift matters. It suggests this was not a one-time accidental stumble into a cave opening. It implies repeated access, structured entry, a location known well enough to be described with environmental precision. When ancient texts use symbolic language, they tend to exaggerate. But this description does not exaggerate. It aligns almost perfectly with what happens inside some of the largest cave domes on Earth. The line about the breath that steals life. There is another phrase in the tablet that rarely gets the attention it deserves. It warns of entering Kurr only after preparation, because within it moves the breath that steals life. For generations, translators treated this as spiritual language, a poetic way of describing the danger of the underworld. But when you compare that wording with what modern cave science understands, the line becomes chillingly literal. Deep cave systems are not neutral environments. They can contain invisible pockets of carbon dioxide that pool in low areas because the gas is heavier than oxygen. These pockets are odorless, colorless, silent. Step into one, and breathing becomes labored within seconds. In extreme cases, unconsciousness can occur before a person even understands what is happening. Modern cavers call these zones bad air chambers. In some systems, they are so lethal that explorers use oxygen monitors at all times. Carbon dioxide is not the only risk. Certain cave networks, especially those formed through volcanic or geothermal processes, can emit radon or hydrogen sulfide. Both are invisible. Both are dangerous. And both have historically caused unexplained deaths among unprepared explorers. Even oxygen levels themselves can fluctuate dramatically in deep, poorly ventilated chambers. Now, imagine encountering this phenomenon 4,000 years ago. A group enters a cavern. The air feels different. Torches begin to flicker weakly because flame reacts to oxygen concentration. Someone kneels to inspect a pool of water and collapses. No visible wound, no predator, no explanation. To Bronze Age observers, what would that look like? A spirit-stealing breath. Here is the striking part. The tablet does not describe random danger. It implies selective entry. It hints that only certain individuals were permitted to descend. That detail has fascinated some modern researchers because populations living at higher altitudes or in specific environments can develop physiological adaptations over generations. Adaptations that improve oxygen processing efficiency. Even without genetic understanding, ancient peoples could have observed that some individuals tolerated the descent better than others. Those individuals would naturally become the chosen ones, not because they were spiritually pure, but because they survived. And suddenly, purification reads less like ritual washing and more like preparation. Controlled breathing, gradual descent, possibly even waiting periods before entering deeper chambers. Modern speleological accidents often occur because explorers underestimate how drastically cave atmospheres differ from surface air. Yet this tablet, written around 2400 BCE, contains language that reads like a safety warning. The detail about time that changes everything. There is one more element in the tablet that often gets overshadowed by the dramatic imagery of inverted skies and deadly breath. It briefly mentions that the journey to Kurr required counting days not by distance alone, but by the movement of light at the entrance. That single reference has puzzled translators for years, because why would light measurement matter for an underground destination? Until you consider seasonal solar alignment. Certain cave systems around the world are positioned so precisely within mountain faces that sunlight penetrates deep into their interiors only during specific times of the year. In some locations, this illumination occurs during solstices or equinoxes, when the sun's angle aligns with the cave opening just long enough to cast a beam far beyond the threshold. Outside of those narrow windows, the interior remains in complete darkness. If Kurr's entrance functioned this way, it would mean access was not constant, it would be cyclical. The phrase about counting days by the movement of light may not be poetic at all. It may describe waiting for the sun to reach a particular position before entering, because only then would the path be partially illuminated naturally. Modern archaeologists have documented ancient sites built with astonishing solar precision. Structures like passage tombs in Ireland or certain Mesoamerican temples align perfectly with solstice sunlight. But the idea that a natural cave entrance could serve the same purpose, intentionally used because of its alignment, introduces a fascinating possibility. If the Sumerians encountered a cave where the sun visibly entered the mountain only on certain days, the event would appear deliberate, almost engineered by cosmic design. The beam of light would cut through darkness, illuminating inner chambers that remained invisible the rest of the year. To an ancient observer, that phenomenon would not feel accidental. It would feel sacred. And here is where the implications deepen. If access depended on solar positioning, then whoever documented Kurr understood both geography and timekeeping with precision. They were not wandering blindly. They were tracking seasonal cycles, planning travel windows, and possibly coordinating expeditions to coincide with specific celestial events. That transforms Kurr from a mysterious underground location into something even more structured. A place entered deliberately, timed carefully, observed systematically. The combination of environmental warnings, architectural scale cave descriptions, and solar timing hints at something far more advanced than casual exploration. It suggests organized expeditions, perhaps even repeated seasonal journeys. When you connect that with the tablet's careful tone, the warnings about air, and the inverted sky imagery, a pattern emerges. The objects they left behind, and why that changes the story. There is one dimension of this mystery that rarely gets discussed outside academic circles, yet it may be the most grounding of all: material traces, not poetry, not translation debates, physical evidence. Across Mesopotamia, archaeologists have recovered administrative tablets that reference long-distance expeditions for metals, especially tin and copper, essential for bronze production. Sites like Ur and Lagash contain records detailing shipments, caravan counts, and even loss reports from trade journeys. These were not symbolic pilgrimages, they were industrial operations. Now consider what happens when ancient mining or exploration teams move far from home. They bring tools, containers, religious tokens. And sometimes they leave them behind. In high-altitude and cave-associated Bronze Age sites across Central Asia, archaeologists have documented pottery styles and metallurgical techniques that show Mesopotamian influence. While trade networks absolutely explain cultural overlap, there is something intriguing about the concentration of certain finds near deep cave regions and mineral-rich zones. In some documented cave sites in Central Asia, Bronze Age tools show soot staining consistent with prolonged underground use. Hammerstones, with repeated microfractures, indicate ore extraction. There are even traces of early smelting residue near cavern entrances, suggesting ore was processed close to where it was mined. Why does this matter? Because if Kurr was simply myth, we would expect symbolic artifacts, amulets, burial goods, ritual deposits. Instead, what appears in similar regions are practical objects: chisels, broken ceramic storage vessels, slag remnants from metalworking. Theories have circulated for decades that some Sumerian references to descending into Kurr may actually encode mining terminology. In Sumerian language, the word for mountain and foreign land overlaps conceptually with resource zones. To enter Kurr could literally mean entering a mineral-rich mountainous region beyond the plains. There is even linguistic speculation that certain deities associated with Kurr were later linked to metallurgy and subterranean wealth, not death. That alignment is not accidental. Ancient cosmology often mapped economic reality into divine narrative. If expeditions were entering deep mountain caves for tin or copper extraction, encountering dangerous gases, seasonal access windows, and massive underground chambers, the experience would feel otherworldly. It would be retold in sacred terms, but rooted in labor and survival. The sound that made them think the earth was alive. There is one sensory detail no translation can fully capture: sound. Deep cave systems are not silent spaces. They breathe, echo, and respond in ways that feel disturbingly organic. Modern speleologists report low-frequency vibrations inside vast chambers, created by underground rivers moving through constricted passages. Air pressure shifts through vertical shafts can produce tonal hums. Water dripping from high ceilings creates rhythmic pulses that bounce unpredictably off curved stone walls. Now, imagine encountering that 4,000 years ago. The Sumerian tablet describing Kurr makes brief but striking reference to the murmuring beneath stone and the voice that answers without form. For decades, those phrases were interpreted as poetic embellishment, perhaps imagined spirits. But anyone who has stood inside a massive limestone cavern knows how deceptive acoustics can be. In large dome chambers, sound waves reflect in delayed loops. A single spoken word can return seconds later from a different direction. Low rumbles from distant water flow can vibrate through the rock like a heartbeat. In certain geological formations, wind passing through narrow openings produces resonant tones, almost like a flute carved into the mountain itself. Modern acoustic mapping of large caves has shown that some chambers amplify specific frequencies naturally. The result can feel intentional, as if the space itself is reacting to human presence. In prehistoric sites around the world, archaeologists have discovered that cave art often appears in areas with strong acoustic resonance. Some researchers propose that early humans were drawn to spaces where sound behaved unusually, associating echoing chambers with spiritual significance. If Sumerian explorers descended into a cavern where their voices returned from invisible voids, where underground rivers thundered beyond sight, where unseen air currents whispered through fissures, how would they interpret that? A living earth, a domain with awareness. This would also explain something subtle in the tablet's tone. It does not describe Kurr as empty. It describes it as inhabited, not necessarily by physical beings, but by presence. That presence may not have been literal creatures or gods. It may have been the sensory overload of an environment unlike anything on the Mesopotamian plains. And here is what makes this especially compelling. Acoustic phenomena inside caves are not random. They are tied to structure. The larger and more complex the chamber system, the more dramatic the sound behavior. So, when the tablet references voices and murmurs beneath stone, it may be indirectly confirming scale. Enormous chambers with interconnected voids capable of carrying sound across distances. The markings that may have been ancient wayfinding codes. There is one final layer that pushes this mystery from environmental observation into deliberate human planning: markings. Not the grand mythic inscriptions carved for gods, but small functional marks that rarely make headlines. In multiple Bronze Age cave systems across Eurasia, archaeologists have documented non-decorative carvings etched into stone near branching passages. These are not artistic murals. They are repetitive symbols, short linear marks, wedge shapes, directional notches, placed at eye level or slightly above. Their distribution pattern is not random. They appear at decision points, intersections, drops, narrow tunnels that lead into dangerous chambers. Now, consider something crucial about Sumerian writing. Cuneiform was originally developed not for religion, but for accounting, for marking grain quantities, livestock numbers, trade goods. It was a practical system before it became literary. That matters, because when Sumerians marked something, they were often labeling, counting, organizing. Some researchers have speculated that certain references in Kurr-related texts to signs placed in stone may not refer to divine inscriptions at all. They may refer to wayfinding markers, an ancient navigation system inside a hazardous underground network. Modern cave explorers use reflective markers, chalk arrows, or tied string to avoid getting lost. Without artificial lighting, without maps, without modern safety protocols, a deep cave system becomes lethal, not because of monsters, but because of disorientation. One wrong turn in darkness can mean never finding the exit again. The tablet's tone suggests familiarity with passage sequences, instructions on where to descend and where not to. That implies a route, and if there was a route, there must have been marking. In documented prehistoric caves in Central Asia and Anatolia, archaeologists have found small clusters of repeated wedge-like carvings near narrow vertical shafts. The shapes are simple enough to be dismissed as tool marks, until you notice they are aligned consistently, facing inward toward safe passages rather than outward toward dead ends. Theories vary. Some argue these were tally marks, others suggest territorial claims. But one possibility is far more practical: coded guidance. If Sumerian expeditions were traveling repeatedly into a cave system tied to metal extraction or seasonal access, they would have needed reliable internal orientation cues. The idea that early writing systems were adapted for subterranean navigation is not widely accepted, but it is not impossible either. What makes this compelling is the pattern: environmental awareness, air warnings, solar timing, acoustic observation, and now, possible structured wayfinding. All of it points towards something remarkably organized, not myth-makers stumbling into darkness, but trained groups entering deliberately, leaving marks for those who would follow. And if that is true, then the Sumerian tablet describing Kurr is not simply telling us where the entrance was. It may be preserving the operational blueprint of one of the oldest underground networks ever systematically explored by human hands. If this changes how you see ancient texts, subscribe now, share your thoughts below, and let's uncover what history buried next.